Global, leading Britain's conversation. The Nigel Farage Show.
Mr. Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. And Donald Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, giving testimony in America at the moment, being pretty damning about his former client. We'll talk about that as the hour develops. Tonight, in the House of Commons, a government motion, fairly neutral government motion, and a series of amendments. To help talk us through it, I'm joined by Theo Usherwood, LBC's political editor. Theo, a night of consequence or not?
Perhaps not. Let's start with the story of the day because of these amendments. And it comes from a man called Alberto Costa, who is the parliamentary private secretary, or was the parliamentary private secretary to David Mundell, the Scottish secretary, forced to resign at lunchtime after he tabled an amendment which garnered cross-party support to protect the rights of EU citizens. Yesterday, Theresa May said it was unworkable. She couldn't implement it because it would mean reopening the withdrawal agreement. Not going to happen. Sajid Javid went into the Home Affairs Select Committee this morning and said actually he didn't hear that, and actually the government was going to accept it and grant Mr Costas' amendment. The government's so angry about it, Theresa May, Downing Street, so angry about it that they forced Mr Costa to resign from his position, and he's now going to go back to the back benches because the government's going to have to accept his amendment. Other amendments to look out for. The first one is going to be at 7:15. That's Jeremy Corbyn's 5-point plans, close to a relationship to the single market, permanent customs union. That's going to fail. SNP have then got an amendment ruling out leaving without a deal. Again, that's going to fail. Then it gets interesting because we are going to have a vote table on an amendment from Caroline Spelman, which would in effect make what Theresa May said yesterday, a promise of a vote on extending Article 50, enshrine that into law. Now, if that passes, another amendment from Yvette Cooper granting time to bring forward legislation would fail automatically. It would become irrelevant. But if Caroline Spelman's amendment fails, then we're going to have the Yvette Cooper, Nick Bowles, Sir Oliver Letwind vote, which would provide time to have a piece of legislation to bring forward and force Theresa May to have a vote on extending Article 50. Theresa May doesn't want this to happen. She knows that if there's a vote on extending Article 50 and that is successful, it is going to be terribly difficult to get anything more out of the European Union in the coming weeks.
Yes, but she's not getting very far on that as it stands anyway, all of which makes it stranger. You know, given that the big demand from the ERG, and some see them as rebels, others see them actually as defending the manifesto upon which they were elected, the fact we've got nothing so far on the backstop, all of it makes it stranger that from what we're hearing this afternoon, Jacob Rees-Mogg and perhaps some of his other colleagues in that group, Steve Baker perhaps as well, are beginning to talk about perhaps backing the withdrawal agreement, which sounds remarkable.
There is a softening of the position. Jacob Rees-Mogg now talking about not necessarily reopening the withdrawal agreement and dealing with the backstop by taking it out of the withdrawal agreement, but putting in some form of codicil or attachment, appendix to the withdrawal agreement. Now, previously, members of the ERG said that simply was not acceptable. That wasn't what they'd sent Theresa May back to Brussels to get.
And they said that vocally, repeatedly.
Absolutely. They'd made that a red line, one of their red lines. But now what they're talking about is if there can be a time limit inserted into, as I said, a codicil or an appendix to the withdrawal agreement, that would be acceptable to the ERG. And the way that this is going to be presented by Downing Street, by the Prime Minister over the coming weeks, or the next 2 or 3 weeks, is very, very simple. Back my deal, or you're going to lose Brexit. And that's why we're now starting to see this softening of the position, because there's starting to be this recognition that if Article 50 is extended, you heard Ken Clarke, the Remainer from Rushcliffe yesterday, standing up in the Commons and saying, well, it would be unacceptable to extend it for a few weeks. We'd need to do it for months, possibly years.
Which, of course, is right.
Yes, he is right.
Because effectively Brussels closes down in the third week of April. There'd be no one to negotiate with.
Absolutely. But that plays into the European Union's hands. It plays into the Remainer's hands. And so there is this realisation that it's now or never from the ERG. And that's why we're now starting to see this softening of the position.
Fascinating. Theo, thank you. And I have to say, as somebody who helped coin the phrase, the worst deal in history about this withdrawal agreement, I haven't changed my mind one little bit. It's a rotten deal. It isn't just even about the money. It's about the fact we can't actually get out of it without the permission of the Junkers and Barniers or whoever is in post at that time. And that's what I absolutely hate about it. So, the Prime Minister, before this development, was mildly optimistic in the last 48 hours about Brexit. This is what she had to say.
We have it within our grasp. As I've just said, I've had a real sense from the meetings I've had here, conversations I've had with EU leaders in recent days, a real sense that we can achieve that deal. It's within our grasp to leave with a deal on the 29th of March, and that's where all of my energies are going to be focused.
Is the Prime Minister right? Is Brexit within our grasp, or indeed her grasp? And if you think, yep, actually, what we've seen today and what we're hearing from Jacob Rees-Mogg and the others, Steve Baker and the others, means that this deal now is going to go through. Let me know you think that on 0345 6060 973. Maybe like me, you think, no, actually, there'll be enough people there who recognise how bad this deal is, and it's going down. Text to 84850. And is Brexit, with her deal, is it actually even worth having? Tell me what you think by tweeting, using the hashtag Farage and LBC, at LBC, and of course, Facebookers, you can watch us and comment there too. Is Brexit, as the Prime Minister says, still within our grasp? Alan is calling from Bromyard in Herefordshire. Good evening, Alan.
Good evening, Nigel. Yes, it is within our grasp, if you mean our, like people like you and me, who want a true Brexit. And I think there needs to be a bringing together of all the very large number of pressure groups who want Brexit but who are operating independently. And they need to come together behind a common approach and a common plan. Unfortunately, we already have that available because David Campbell-Bannerman came up with a solution.
Yep, I agree with that.
Said it was a jolly good idea, and we just need to actually implement the use of Schedule 24 of the General Agreement of Tariffs and Trade and get everybody who wants to leave in the country to say, yes, that is what we need to do.
Alan, I agree with absolutely everything you're saying. Trouble is, all the different pressure groups don't have a vote in this process. It's the members of Parliament that have a vote in this process. And if Jacob Rees-Mogg and Steve Baker, if large numbers of the ERG and those of that mindset were to support this deal, she might just get this deal through. And that, to quote you, would not be a true Brexit, would it?
No, it'd be terrible. No, so we have to change the minds of the MPs, and the way to do that is for their constituents to lobby them and all to be saying the same thing.
I agree with all of that. Alan, imagine that you are a member of Parliament, right? And you have this, very much the same point of view that I've got. And you were told in a couple of weeks' time, right, Alan, this is it, matey. Either you vote for this deal or we're headed for a massive extension of Article 50 and perhaps a second referendum. What in those circumstances, Alan, would you do?
Well, you say scrap the lot. Get rid of the withdrawal agreement.
No. That won't be the choice you face. You are a backbench Tory MP, Alan, and you are facing this choice. You are facing the most important decision you will ever have as an elected representative. Yeah. Do you vote for Mrs May's deal, or do you accept a long delay and a possible second referendum?
But as an independent-minded MP, which you're suggesting I would be in this context, I don't have to accept either of those.
You can simply abstain.
No, I can promote the GATT 24 solution.
No, Alan, it won't be on the agenda.
Well, it will be if enough people...
No, Alan, the Speaker won't pick it. Alan, you're dodging the question. You can fight as hard as you like for what you want. Goodness knows, I've been doing it for a quarter of a century.
Well, it's about time we all got together and...
all right,
Alan... There's 24 or more people, groups...
Alan, you're gloriously optimistic, but I'm afraid that's not the way it's going to be. I'm going to go to Warwick and speak to Andrew. Good evening, Andrew.
Hello, Nigel. I'm terrified that this is not going to happen. I think it's the fact that the previously stiff Rees-Mogg has gone floppy.
Floppy moggy.
Terrifying. Right. Yes, absolutely. I mean, he loves his sort of Christian metaphors. I fear that we may end up in a situation where if we cannot break free because we've been snipped by Delilah, I feel we may have to go back into the temple and push it down from the inside. So I think the sort of the outcome table of this is either we get to leave with no deal,
yep,
or we have to then go ahead to a potential extension of Article 50 in a second referendum. And I think if the referendum ends up Remain, I think we're more or less... I mean, we're a powerful player in the EU. Imagine a powerful player with a Brexit party succeeding a PM Farage or PM Rees-Mogg.
Right.
And somebody... I mean, imagine how much more annoying it would be to the EU if you were actually...
Well, Andrew, I've done my best to annoy them over the last 20 years, I can tell you. But let me just ask you that same question I asked the previous caller. You know, just imagine, Andrew, you're there as a backbench Conservative Member of Parliament, or Labour maybe, but let's say Conservative Member of Parliament, and the Chief Whip comes to you and says, right, either you vote for Mrs May's deal, or there's going to be a long extension of Article 50 and probably a second referendum. What would you do, Andrew, in those circumstances?
I would say long extension to Article 50 and publish and be damned.
You'd rather take the risk. Do you know what, Andrew? When this vote comes, if this vote passes in the House of Commons, it will come to Strasbourg, to the European Parliament, where the absolute final vote is, and I am voting against this deal. I'm with you. Thank you. Tapinder is a new caller from Wokingham. Good evening.
Hi, Nigel, how are you?
I'm all right. I'm just a bit worried that my colleagues, people I shared platforms with in the referendum, might just be going a bit soft. I'm worried.
Well, yeah, so am I. You know, I voted leave, and, you know, I would like us to leave. I think my call was due to about the second referendum. I think people seem to forget that in the last budget, the Chancellor promised £20 billion to the NHS.
Uh-huh.
Now, if we stay within the EU or get anywhere close to staying with the EU, that $20 billion goes out the window.
Well, I'd quite like to leave Tapinder with no deal and save $39 billion. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Exactly. I agree totally. Save that. And you, plus the fact we've got trade deals around the world, we can then afford to pay $20 billion to the NHS. But if, for some peculiar reason, we end up staying, which I just get the feeling, deep down, I get this niggling feeling that we're going to end up staying within the EU because the parties can't agree.
But what would you do, Tapinder?
$20 billion goes out the window.
Let me ask you, put yourself in the position of a Tory backbencher, perhaps a member of the ERG. Chief Whip comes to you and says, right, Tapinder, today's the day. Either you vote for Mrs May's deal, or there'll be a long extension to Article 50 and possibly a second referendum. In those circumstances, would you vote for Mrs May's Brexit?
I'd have no choice, because I don't want an extension, and I don't want a second referendum.
Okay, well, that's the view. That clearly is the view that's beginning to be taken by some in the ERG, and I understand the reasons for it, but I just don't like it. Thank you. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's 6:15 and time for the...
LBC, The Nigel Farage Show.
Mrs May says Brexit is within our grasp. I've been thinking all the way through this that actually her deal could not possibly go through. It's too awful, and that an extension of Article 50 was the most likely thing. But today, quite a big development this afternoon with Jacob Rees-Mogg, Steve Baker and others in the ERG beginning to say, well, maybe we'll support this deal if Mrs May goes and we get somebody better in charge for the next stage of the negotiation. That appears to be a direction of travel. So maybe Brexit is within our grasp. But then it's Mrs May's Brexit. And is that the Brexit you voted for? Certainly isn't with me. Now, Lisa from Northamptonshire says something that's been on my mind anyway. She says, you haven't mentioned Herman Van Rompuy's disgusting, derogatory comments to the UK in the Evening Standard. I think it's a disgrace that the EU should be allowed to get away with this. Who'd want to stay in the EU with these horrid people? Lisa, I'm with you. And this is what Herman Van Rompuy has said. With their backs against the wall, the abyss in front of their eyes, and a knife on their throat, we are nearly there. If some time is needed after the end of March, that will not be a problem for the 27th. That was former EU President Herman Van Rompuy, who I crossed swords with more than once in the past. And yes, Lisa, these are arrogant, nasty, vile people who hate the existence of the nation-state. They want to destroy the nation-state. They want us all to become part of a United States of Europe, and stopping Brexit is a priority. And they don't care what language they use. It's as if that's the kind of language that an enemy you were fighting against in war would use about you. But that's how they see this. They see this as a war to keep the European Union together. And in that battle, they are aided and abetted by many members of our political class. Back to, and let's listen to Mrs May again.
We have it within our grasp. As I've just said, I've had a real sense from the meetings I've had here, conversations I've had with EU leaders in recent days, a real sense that we can achieve that deal. It's within our grasp to leave with a deal on the 29th of March, and that's where all of my energies are going to be focused.
within our grasp to get this deal. And that really was looking a bit like moonshine, because, when you lose by 230 votes, your withdrawal agreement, you're ordered by the House of Commons to go and get a change to the backstop. So far, you've got nothing. But kind of Jacob and Co are saying, well, you've got to get a codicil, a sort of legal attachment that puts some time limit on it. But one wonders, even if we got that, how legally binding would it be? John on Facebook says, May's deal is Remain and shouldn't even be on the table. Nathaniel says, could it be a possibility that she's doing this just so that she can force a no deal? Well, Nathaniel, I keep saying the fourth plinth in Trafalgar Square is free, and if she delivers a sort of WTO Brexit, as far as I'm concerned, we should build the biggest statue that's ever been seen there. Gordon is calling from Northwich in Cheshire. Good evening, Gordon.
Good evening, Nigel. Nice to be back here in the UK again, once and for all.
Good.
Thank you very much. No, I'm just wondering that since the withdrawal bill is a piece of law that has been written into our constitution, it doesn't seem to me that a lot of the Brexiteer MPs are screaming from the rooftops about Section 13 of the withdrawal bill. Now, according to that, is that on the January the 28th, if no deal or no agreement can be reached by that date, the January the 28th, that we leave on WTO rules. That is my perfect understanding of it. Now, the likes of Yvette Cooper, Salisbury, Thornbury, and all the rest of what we've got now as an acronym for them is plebs, posh, liberal, elitist, bar steward socialists, can we say?
Well, you're clearly not fans of them, Gordon, but some others think some others think they're heroic. But hey, go on.
They're not heroic. These are people that we have put our trust into. That we said that when it come to the GE, that we believed everything they said, and they blatantly lied to us. But May has seemed to have found a way. She's trying to put Brexiteers' backs into the corner. She's having votes on no deal. She's having votes on her deal and everything else. And she's throwing our backs into a corner, but which, at the same time, Theresa May and the rest of her clan are breaking the law because it is Section 13
No, Gordon. I'm sorry, Gordon, that's wrong because I mean, are you talking about a bill or an act? A bill is something that is before Parliament. An act is something that's gone through Parliament. What the Act does say, though, is that if the legislation doesn't change, we do leave on March the 29th with a WTO deal. So that we can agree on, Gordon. But I just don't see the Prime Minister holding firm. Indeed, the Prime Minister is going to say to her party in a couple of weeks' time, either back my deal or it's a long extension to Article 50 and possibly a second referendum. That is actually, in practical terms, what is going to happen. What would you do, Gordon, if you were faced with that choice?
If I was faced with that choice, I think to myself, if I was an MP, for the good of my constituents, which a lot of constituents have voted out, such as, how can I say, I can't remember her name now, that's how nonchalant she is.
So, come on, what would you do?
I would abstain.
You would abstain?
I think I'd have to abstain from the vote, yes.
Okay.
Because I couldn't do that to my constituents where my constituents have voted out.
And is that because you see her deal as not being a true Brexit?
Her deal is nothing but, how can I say, terms and conditions of what the EU want.
All right.
That's all I can say about that, because at the end of the day, she has just blatantly lied to us, to the country. She could have got us out. She could have signed Article 50 a long time ago, but unfortunately, the likes of Gina Miller,
I'm afraid she was a Remainer at heart anyway. Gordon, thank you very much indeed. Remainers have been working hard ever since the referendum. No deal will be voted down. Article 50 extended. ERG group caving in and Brexit betrayed, says Mike in Stockton, who's not sounding a very happy bunny this evening, is he? Vince is a new caller from Portsmouth. Good evening, Vince.
Good evening, Nigel. What a pleasure to talk to you.
Welcome to the show, Vince.
Thank you.
So she thinks she's going to get this deal through because she thinks the alternative is unacceptable to Eurosceptic backbenchers.
Yep. Now, what really bugs me about this whole thing, Nigel, is that the mainstream media, to a great degree, I will say here, we do get on LBC, particularly with yourself, we get a chance to air what we want to say. But everything's being shown from one perspective. Nobody's actually stood up in Parliament and said, OK, You know, everyone's saying this is what will happen if we leave on WTO, this is what will happen if we leave on this deal. But nobody at any time has stood up and said, what will happen, short and long term, if we remain? What are the future plans of the EU, and what will the effect be on Great Britain? Now, I know that.
Yes. No, well, Vince, of course, you're right, because the Remain side say, look, Remain is a constant. You know what you're getting with Remain. You don't know what you're getting with Leave. And actually, Vince, nothing could be further from the truth. You know, we joined something that was called a common market. The EEC became the EC, which then became the EU. They now would very much like it to become the USE. They want an army, an air force, a navy, and everyone to join the euro. Now, that's what they want, Vince. And in fact, they're taking more and more powers to themselves at the centre. So the EU is a dynamic thing, and you're right. We do not have that debate enough, do we?
No, that is my exact point, Nigel.
Yep.
You know, you've hit the nail on the head. That's my point. That debate is not being put from that side. And I think, you know, it bothers me greatly that there are so many people out there that want to remain that don't understand the implications of doing so.
What do you think would happen, Vince, if we stayed?
If we stayed, exactly what you say. I mean, one of the biggest things I've said to people, and I will say, Nigel, I've actually changed people's minds over remaining to leave.
Yep.
When I said to them, do you realise in the future, if they do, and we know they are putting together an EU army, they will conscript. How do you feel about your children or your grandchildren having to go and serve an EU army, possibly, and let's be honest, to go and fight a war or a conflict that you have not had any say in whether we enter?
Well, we don't know they'll conscript, Vince, but they may well. But certainly, an activist foreign policy, an expansionist European Union, a European army. I'm with you. It doesn't sound like a very happy recipe. Vince, thank you for your call and for your point, and it was one of the things that annoyed me all through the referendum, in fact, all through the last 25 years, that debate with Nick Clegg, when he said I was a dangerous fantasist to be talking about the existence of a European army because it was never going to happen. Well, hey, it is happening. Oh dear, you're listening to The Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's 6:30 and time for
Britain's Conversation. The Nigel Farage Show. Tweet at LBC using the hashtag #FarageOnLBC.
Well, we're talking all things Brexit here as the House of Commons has a debate and a series of votes tonight that may not be of that much significance, but the real Brexit story of the day is it appears there's a significant softening of the position coming out of the ERG group from Jacob Rees-Mogg and Steve Baker. It's being suggested that if there is a codicil with some sort of time element to the backstop, that actually they would all go out and vote for the Prime Minister's deal. So maybe Brexit is within our grasp, to quote the Prime Minister. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., it is wall to wall on cable television and radio networks because Donald Trump's ex-lawyer, Michael Cohen, tells Congress that the president is a racist, a con man and a cheat. It's the first time he's spoken since he was sentenced to jail as part of the Mueller probe. He was found guilty of lying to Congress. He says Trump asked him to pay off porn star Stormy Daniels. He also said he provided various checks to people as hush money to keep them quiet. And he also says that Trump had advance notice of WikiLeaks possessing damaging Clinton emails. Let's listen to Michael Cohen today.
I am ashamed because I know what Mr. Trump is. He is a racist, he is a con man, and he is a cheat.
Well, very strong stuff from Michael Cohen. As you can imagine, it's absolutely dominating everything in America. Meanwhile, of course, the president, Trump, is in Vietnam for a summit with the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un. And the Trump team say, look, this testimony is a ploy by this lawyer to get a reduced sentence, as, of course, he has been found guilty already. And I'm flying off to Washington, D.C. in the morning. There's a big conference going on out there for the next couple of days. It'll be very interesting to report back tomorrow on air just what the temperature is after these Michael Cohen allegations. So, is Brexit within our grasp? Is Theresa May getting closer to getting her deal through Parliament? And if she is that really Brexit? I'm going to Basingstoke to speak to Simon. Good evening, Simon.
Good evening, Nigel. I think to call it Brexit is stretching the truth or the definition of Brexit beyond all reasonable measures. I'm concerned. I've actually read some of the agreement. It doesn't even mention the UK rebate, so I'm not even sure if we'll continue to receive that under Theresa May's deal.
Well, that really depends. I mean, the next spending round kind of ends in 2020, so that would depend. That just would depend, Simon, where we went to. But what we do know is we're paying £39 billion for the privilege of having a conversation with them about what would laughingly be called a free trade deal.
It is, and to put that in context, the so-called austerity cuts were around $12 billion a year. So it's 3 years of austerity cuts, or more than that, 3.25 years of austerity cuts, is what we're willing to pay for a 10-page document which has no legally binding nature. But I think what this has made me personally realise is that the Conservative Party is no longer worthy of the name. And what we need to do is, I think it's so, as you have much more knowledge than I do, it's very difficult to build an alternative party. I think if Brexit doesn't go through, my first action personally will be to join the Conservative Party, and I'd advise many others who will leave voters to do the same. And I think it's about time we did to the Tory party what Momentum has done to the Labour Party. They moved it to the left. Why don't we move the Tory party to the right?
This has been Aaron Banks's big idea, hasn't it, over the course of the last few months, to get people to join local associations and perhaps to deselect those MPs who've gone against all the promises made in the party's manifesto and now support a second referendum. So, Simon, if you were placed in this position, and let's face it, people like Jacob who've spoken out very strongly, very clearly against this withdrawal agreement. Goodness me, I've shared platforms with him doing it under a Leave Means Leave banner. He's now beginning to wonder at himself, isn't he? Even though it's a rotten deal, at least if we vote for it, at least we leave the EU. Is that not perhaps the calculation that may be going on here, Simon?
I think it is, but I think it's time to call the bluff of Remainers. I would ask every Remainer MP one question. What government spending will you cut to pay for the $39 billion blackmail payment, the outstanding pension liabilities, and how are you going to justify that to your electorate?
Simon, I think you should be in Parliament. You'd be brilliant. Thank you for your call. Ben is a new caller from Edinburgh. Good evening, Ben.
Hi, Nigel. Thank you for having me on.
OK, so, would you vote for Mrs May's deal if you were a Tory backbencher, Ben?
You know what? I don't think I would, and I'll explain why. First off, I agree with you, it's possibly the worst deal in history.
Yep.
Brexit being a vote for sovereignty. So,
I've got it. Yeah.
This is the opposite. Do you know what I mean? Locking us into this deal with no way of us leaving, that's not Brexit at all. That's insulting. That's ridiculous.
Yep.
So what I think I'd do, I would vote it down, and I'll tell you what I'll do, and I'll explain it just after. I would vote to extend Article 50, and I'd do that in order to have another vote. The vote being either no deal, because it's clear May's not going to get any deal through Parliament, either no deal or remain, and have a very simple choice that people can make a decision on then.
So you think a second referendum, Ben, would sort this whole thing out, do you?
I don't think sorting it out completely is really possible. I just think that there's no way we can get any deal through Parliament, and the only option, if there's no deal that could be made through Parliament, is either to have no deal or for Remain to Remain to be the option.
And do you think, Ben, in those circumstances, so we have another referendum, second referendum, and no deal wins by a bigger margin than the Leave vote won last time, do you think then our politicians would implement the will of the people or not?
I think there can be no mistake then. I think once everyone...
Hang on a second. Why was there a mistake last time?
I think there's a lot of things people have said for and against it last time. There were a lot of things that were said that we've later found out aren't necessarily the case.
And you know what, Ben? That happens in every single election that's ever happened in history, from the local parish council to the US president. You can always, after the election, query what was said by one side or the other. You see, the reason I'm making this point, Ben, is that government leaflet, the £9 million that Cameron spent to deliver that leaflet through every home in this country, could not have been clearer. All right, it was Project Fear from start to finish, but it did tell us, if you vote for this, we will implement it. I just don't see what Ben, what I'm saying to you is, maybe what we need, actually, is a bigger change of our whole political system.
So first of all, I definitely think we do need to change the system. But as I see it, with who we've got in Parliament at the moment, the only thing that will get through is a vote. And is a second vote. That's what people can unanimously agree on. And I think once people have seen how the EU has treated us and have seen everything we've gone through, I think when it comes down to a vote of no deal or remain, I think people will remember what's happened to us recently.
Yep.
I think people will make a smart choice.
Ben, I have to say, I agree with you very strongly with that last point. I think the sheer behaviour of these EU bureaucrats, and even that insulting, vile comments from Herman Van Rompuy today, I think, Ben, that has resonated with people. Thank you very much indeed. Anita from Ramsgate says, I am so tired and weary with the battle of Brexit, on, day after day. I know, Anita, they want to grind us down, and that's what Mrs May's doing to her backbenchers. She's grinding them down, and today we saw perhaps she might be getting somewhere. Nigel is a new caller from Wakefield. Good evening, Nigel.
Good evening, Nigel. My point is, I don't believe that this deal would be the right deal. I voted to leave the EU.
Yep.
And I think that we have to go back to the basics of what that actually meant. You know, that vote of a referendum was nothing to do with the Labour Party, the Conservative Party, and even your good self with UKIP. It was all about our decision to take a vote on the direction of our great country. This great United Kingdom, Great Britain, this country. So yes, why did huge numbers turn out? Huge numbers turned out because it wasn't aligned to, stick a teddy bear here in Wakefield and always vote Labour. It wasn't about that. It was about my vote being worthy of your vote.
And it mattering.
And it mattered. And those people who went by the millions in the largest turnout believed that democracy decision. They would be upheld. But instead, the majority of the MPs, who put us in this position, by the way, have decided to oppose tooth and nail anything that is taking us closer to a divorce from the EU.
Nigel, I completely agree with that analysis, but just look at the dilemma. Imagine that you, as somebody who believes in, the democratic vote that took place, as you clearly very passionately do, what would you do if you were a backbench member of Parliament and the Chief Whip said to you, now come on, Nigel, vote for Mrs May's deal, or it's a long extension and possibly a second referendum? What would you do back to the wall in that situation?
Abstain, probably.
Abstain. All right, Nigel, thank you. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show. See, it's a tough question to answer, isn't it? Very tough indeed, and I can see the dilemma. It's now 6:45. And
Farage Show on LBC.
Well, in some ways, maybe President Macron is making the job of the Prime Minister a little bit easier, because he had a summit today with Angela Merkel, and the French and Germans often get together. And, of course, the subject of extension of Article 50 came up, and Macron said we would support an extension request only if it was justified by a new choice of the British. Now, I think what he's saying there is, now, look, if you want an extension, you're going to have to guarantee us a second referendum. And in a sense, that does help to drive MPs towards Mrs May's deal. And remember one thing, Juncker, Barnier, Tusk, Verhofstadt, they all love this withdrawal agreement. They'd rather we weren't leaving the EU, but if we are going to leave, let's at least be their hostage. That's their view, and they think they're going to have the whip hand over us in the next stage of this process. They all want this withdrawal agreement. And as I say, with a softening of the position coming from the ERG group today, perhaps Mrs May's deal's got a bit closer. I hope it hasn't, but hey-ho. Bruce is a new caller from Cape Town in South Africa. Hi, Bruce.
Yes, hi, Nigel. And let me say right up front, you won't have a bigger fan than me outside of the UK.
Well, very sweet of you, Bruce.
I follow you and I listen to you on a regular basis.
Well, splendid. Right. So looking from afar with a bit of detachment, Mrs May says she's going to get her deal through Parliament. Do you think she is?
No, Mrs May doesn't want a Brexit. You and I know that. She's doing anything and everything she can to avoid it and to keep your country within this European Union. And as you and I, well, as far as I'm concerned, and I'd like to think you agree with me, there are very, very powerful forces at play here. And the front men of these forces are the likes of the Junckers and the Barniers and the Tusks of this world. They do what they're told, but the powerful forces are actually
the ones that are wanting the UK to stay within that cabal.
Huge multinational businesses, Bruce. Huge global businesses.
Yes, the bankers are the worst.
Yeah.
Nigel, the bankers are the worst.
Yeah. So would it be better?
You mentioned the two choices you were putting to this.
Bruce, I think where we're going with this, all right, and there are lots of other things I want to see in this. I mean, above all, and I mean, somebody says to me, and Mark from Sunderland says to me, why are the ERG not putting forward Article 24 for debate in Parliament? I would much happier to leave on WTO, use Article 24 of the GATT Treaty. But, Bruce, the reality is this. Where we're going in the next 2 weeks is these backbench MPs who voted leave and who want to honour their manifesto, they're going to get a choice. The choice will be back my deal, or there'll be a long extension and possibly a second referendum. What would you do, Bruce, in that position?
Now, this is where I come in. I would go for the long wait to the referendum, whatever, for one reason, one primary reason only. Nigel, the only way to really sort this out in the long term, in my personal opinion, is there's got to be a party that millions and millions of UK people can go to, can rally behind, because they can't rally behind the Conservatives, they can't rally behind Labour. I mean, look at the parliamentarians, how they've lied and they've done anything and everything, but they certainly haven't done anything about the wishes of the people in the referendum. So where do these millions of UK people go? What they need is a place that they can go to, Nigel. And I think that's where the country needs the time to form this party. I know you said in the past it would be a difficult thing to do, etc., etc. But I think this is a special circumstance now. You have to have a party, and you need a special person. Somebody like yourself, in my personal opinion.
That's sweet of you, Bruce. Bruce, I would not underestimate the power and the passion out there in this country of a big change in British politics, and there could well be a very strong new force in British politics. Bruce, I thank you and your long-distance call. Isn't this a betrayal of a 17.4 million by the ERG? Well, Jane, at the moment, they haven't absolutely started flying the white flag, and they are saying that they would need something, a codicil attached to the withdrawal agreement about the backstop, but we do appear to be edging in a direction that I find a little bit surprising. Julie is a new caller from Dartmoor. Good evening, Julie, and welcome.
Good evening, Nigel. My view is this is an absolutely dreadful deal.
Yep.
There's absolutely no way we can sign up to it, codicil or no codicil. I feel we've put our trust in Jacob Rees-Mogg and Steve Baker, and if they do vote for it, even albeit with a codicil, they will have let us down very badly. It's just one bloody more nail in the coffin.
So, Judy, would you? Okay, let me. I've done this point before. You're sitting there, Julie, as a backbench Tory MP. You're faced with this deal or an alternative of a long extension to Article 50 and possibly a second referendum. Would you be prepared to take that risk, Julie?
I would. Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, do you know what? So would I, because this deal is simply so awful, isn't it?
It is really awful, and I feel that, like some of your previous corners, we need to make our voice known, and there isn't a vehicle, really, to do that.
Well, let's see what happens, Julie. Just because we're getting a softening of position, by the way, does not mean it's by any means certain that Mrs May's deal is going to go through. I wonder, Judy, thank you for your call. I wonder, are the DUP going to vote for this deal? I don't really think they are. Tony is calling from West Bromwich. Good evening, Tony.
Good evening, Nigel. How are you?
I'm well, welcome.
I'm disgusted but not surprised at the turn of events. The Mrs May deal is a bag of worms sick. Nobody in their right minds who loves this country could vote for it. Why don't the DUP and ERG club together and vote down the government? That leads to a general election.
Yep.
The new Brexit party appears. 17.4 million raging people will get behind it. They'll only stand against the remainers, so maybe a third of MPs are pro-leave, so leave them alone. Just go against the remainers. Surely that would lead to an outcome where all of a sudden the balance of power is tilted in favour of leave. With a strong leaver in charge, we managed to escape the EU glue pot at last. Do you think that's realistic, Nigel?
No, Tony. I think it's... and I do hear what you're saying, and I do agree with everybody that British politics could well be reshaped by this whole process. But the idea that you can produce a brand new political party like a jack-in-the-box and 6 weeks later start to win large numbers of seats in Parliament, it's never happened before under our first-past-the-post system, and it's... I'm not going to say it's impossible, because nothing, Tony, is impossible, but it's dash difficult. Thank you for your call. Thank you for your thoughts. And I threw, to all of you tonight, I threw that dilemma, that question, what would you do if you're a Leaver, faced with that choice? The choice that Mrs May is going to put them in. When Ollie Robbins talked in that bar the other week, he was right. It's going to be back her deal or extension and possibly second referendum. It's not an easy one. I still think the deal is just not worth voting for. I'll be in Washington, D.C. tomorrow. I'll tell you what the temperature is after Michael Cohen's comments today. At 10 tonight, it's Tom Swarbrick, but up next, it's Ian Dale.
Well, Nigel, lots of people have been committing news today. We're going to be talking about everything that's been going on in the world. We'll bring you the results from the House of Commons, lots of votes over the course of the next hour. We'll